Close your eyes and imagine a map full of kingdoms that don't exist anymore. No grand farewell, no famous last battles, just quiet disappearances. Castles crumbled. Rivers changed course. Names faded from memory. Tonight, we re-traveling across continents and centuries to uncover these forgotten realms from golden African hills to misty European forests. These were once powerful places with kings, traders, and families who thought their world would last forever. But history can be cruel and quiet at the same time. The mighty kingdom of melted into Spain's hills. Mapungubwe's golden rhino was buried under dust. The echoes of Polotzky's bells grew faint on the wind, and dozens more slipped away, leaving only whispers for us to follow. So, fluff your pillow, settle in, and let the past unfold like an old parchment. If you're new here, tap subscribe, because this isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey through the world's most peaceful disappearances. By the end of tonight's story, you'll see history differently and maybe even dream differently. Let's begin. Picture an old wrinkled map lying on a wooden table. Candles flicker, shadows dance across faded kingdoms that most folks today can't even name. Some kingdoms vanish so quietly, you'd think they just packed up one day, left a note on the door and said, "Gone fishing, forever." Tonight, we aren't talking about dramatic falls with catapults and burning cities. Nope. We're here for the quiet exits, the kingdoms that slowly faded, like ink washed away by time. These are the kind of stories that sneak up on you like that one knight who never makes a sound in heavy armor. History loves to shout about the big collapses, Rome falling, Constantinople taken, castles under siege, but the truth. Most kingdoms don't go out with fire and trumpets. They just stop being there. No loud goodbye, no big fight, just silence. And sometimes, that's even sadder. Imagine living in one of these places. One year, you're part of a proud little realm with banners and market days. The next year, your kids grow up calling themselves by a new name, speaking a slightly different language, and nobody remembers the old flag you swore to. That's how history erases a place. Not with swords, but with time. Why does this happen? Sometimes the land changes. Rivers dry up, farms fail, and folks quietly move to where the grass is greener. Literally, other times, trade routes shift. If your kingdom depends on merchants passing through, and suddenly they all take a shorter path, your bustling city turns into a ghost town. Nature can do it to earthquakes, droughts, plagues. No villain, no hero, just bad luck. And sometimes big empires just sort of swallow the little guys. They don't need to fight. They invite you to a feast, hand you a crown, and by dessert, you're part of their empire. It's like being absorbed by a bigger friend group you don't even notice when you stop wearing your old team colors. There's something kind of romantic about it, don't you think? These kingdoms didn't scream. They just blended into the world like old ruins overgrown with ivy. It's the medieval version of Irish goodbyes, lipping out of the party without saying a word. Let's take a moment to picture what one of these fading nights might have felt like. The air is cool. A thin fog curls around the village huts. Somewhere a tired farmer stares at the horizon and wonders why fewer merchants are coming through. The market is smaller now. The blacksmith sharpens fewer swords. The old stories still get told by the fire, but the young folk, they've already started using new words borrowed from their neighbors. By the time the grandchildren are born, the old kingdom's name is just a bedtime story itself. This is why forgotten kingdoms are special. They're a reminder that history isn't always about battles. Sometimes it's about whispers. A temple abandoned because the river moved. A royal palace turned to dust because trade dried up. Whole cultures blending quietly into the next. Take the Nabateans, for example. You know, the Petra people with the fancy rock-cut city. They didn't fall in some grand war. Rome just absorbed them, and one day the world stopped calling them Nabateans. Or the Srivijaya Empire in Indonesia, once masters of the seas. Then trade shifted, and poof, their ports went silent. These stories are coming chapter by chapter, and each one is a little window into the past. But before we go on, let's step back and think about why these vanishings matter to us now. In a world that feels loud and fast, these kingdoms are like quiet old songs. They teach us humility. Even the strongest walls can crumble without a single arrow fired. Even the brightest banners can fade without a single tear shed. And maybe there's a small lesson here for us. Not everything ends with drama. Sometimes change is just slow and gentle, and that's okay. Life, like history, keeps moving. So, grab your blanket, take a deep breath, and let the candlelight flicker on the walls of your imagination. Ahead of us lies a journey across deserts, jungles, mountains, and forgotten coasts. We'll follow faint trails of ruins and whispers, and we'll meet kingdoms that once thrived quietly and disappeared even quieter. In the next chapter, we'll walk through the sandstone canyons of Petra, where an entire kingdom carved its soul into the cliffs. But for now, close your eyes for a second and imagine those old maps again, the ones with faded edges and half-erased names. Every one of those names was once someone's home, someone's pride. And tonight, we're going to bring a few of them back to life, if only for a little while. Let's wander now to the deserts of what we call Jordan today. Picture sandstone cliffs glowing pink under a sleepy evening sky. Tucked between narrow canyons lies Petra, a city carved right into the rock. Long ago, this place wasn't just a tourist postcard, it was the beating heart of the Nabatean kingdom. The Nabateans were clever folk. They weren't the loud kind of empire. No stomping armies or bragging kings here. These people built a trading network by being smart, patient, and a little sneaky. They found ways to control the caravan routes that moved spices, incense, and shiny things between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. If you wanted frankincense for your temple or pepper for your feast, odds are you paid a Nabatean toll along the way. But now, Petra wasn't just any city. Imagine walking through a skinny canyon called the Sick. The walls rise like giant castle towers, and after a long walk, you step into the sun, and bam. There's the treasury, that famous temple facade cut straight into the cliff. It's the kind of thing that makes even the most serious knight whisper. Whoa. The Nabateans didn't just carve pretty walls. They engineered water systems that would make a modern plumber proud. Deserts are tough, but these folks built hidden channels, cisterns, and reservoirs. When the rains came, they trapped every drop. It's like they turned a dry kingdom into a secret oasis. Here's the funny part. For all their skill, the Nabateans didn't leave behind big libraries or long scrolls bragging about themselves. They weren't big on writing down their life story. Most of what we know comes from outsiders or from the rocks themselves. Maybe they figured, why write a book when you can carve a city? Their quiet disappearance started when Rome began eyeing their trade routes. Rome didn't smash Petra to bits, they just politely annexed it around 106 CE one day. You're a proud Nabatean merchant. The next day you're paying taxes to a Roman governor. Rome even renamed the place Arabia Petraea. The Nabatean identity faded over time, and their language, once scribbled on stones, stopped being spoken. But life didn't end with a bang. Petra kept going for centuries, even hosting churches in the Byzantine era. Gradually, trade routes shifted, and earthquakes rattled the region. By the Middle Ages, the once busy streets were silent. Travelers passed by without even realizing a kingdom had slept beneath the sand. Picture a lone traveler in the 12th century, riding a tired camel past the cliffs. He sees strange carved faces in the rock, half hidden by drifting sand. Maybe he wonders who built them. Maybe he shrugs and keeps riding. How a whole civilization can slip away quiet as a fox sneaking out of a chicken coop. Fast forward to the 1800s, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt disguised himself as a Bedouin pilgrim and rediscovered Petra for the Western world. He probably gasped at the treasury the same way we would today. But imagine the ghosts of the Nabateans watching him with a sly smile, saying, "Oh, you finally noticed us again." The Nabatean story is a perfect example of how a kingdom can vanish without drama. They didn't pick a fight they couldn't win. They didn't get wiped out in a single disaster. They just blended first into Rome, then into the shifting sands of history. There's a lesson here, tucked between the rocks and shadows. Strength isn't always about force. Sometimes it's about flexibility. The Nabateans thrived in a harsh desert because they adapted. And when bigger powers came knocking, they didn't cling to glory. They quietly became part of something else. It's a little bittersweet, but also strangely peaceful. Close your eyes for a moment. Hear the whisper of desert wind through narrow canyons. Smell the imaginary spice caravans, the camel's dusty path, the faint sweetness of incense burning under a starry sky. Somewhere in that quiet, you can almost hear a Nabatean merchant haggling over a sack of cinnamon, or a stone carver sharpening his chisel before carving yet another majestic facade. As the moon rises over Petra, the sandstone glows like embers in a dying fire. The city sleeps, but its beauty hasn't faded. Even now, when travelers walk through the sick and step into that open courtyard, they're greeted by a kingdom's ecosoft, ancient and proud, yet humble. The Nabateans might be gone as a people, but their handiwork outlasted them by 2,000 years. That's the magic of these forgotten kingdoms. They teach us that even quiet things leave marks. It's not everything that matters shouts. Tonight we sail far from Petra's desert cliffs to a world of emerald islands and salty breezes. Welcome to Southeast Asia, somewhere between the 7th and 13th centuries. Picture warm seas glowing gold in the evening sun, coconut palms swaying like lazy dancers, and ships with tall wooden masts rocking gently in the harbor. This is Srivijaya, the empire of the seas. Srivijaya wasn't the kind of kingdom with giant castles or endless armies. Nope, these folks ruled the waves. They sat on the crossroads of the busiest trade routes on earth. Spices, silks, gems, and ideas all passed through their harbors. You could almost smell the cinnamon and sandalwood carried on the monsoon winds. The capital, somewhere near modern-day Palembang in Indonesia, was a bustling port city where sailors from India, China, and Arabia came to barter and gossip. Imagine a marketplace where you could hear a dozen languages at once. A Chinese merchant haggles for nutmeg. An Indian scholar shares stories of faraway gods. And a local Srivijayan sailor laughs loudly over a bowl of steaming rice. It was a kingdom alive with the hum of trade. But Srivijaya wasn't just about business. They were champions of Buddhism too. Their monasteries drew monks and scholars from as far away as Nalanda in India. The empire became a spiritual stopover, a place where travelers could refresh both their ships and their souls. A medieval monk named Yi Jing even wrote about staying there, saying the Srivijayans were generous hosts and serious about their faith. The empire's power came from the sea. They didn't have to march armies across deserts or mountains. They controlled the choke points of trade, the Malacca, Strait, and Sunda Strait. If you wanted to sail from China to India, you'd better be on good terms with Srivijaya. Their fleets patrolled the waters like quiet guardians, ensuring pirates stayed away and taxes got paid. But like all kingdoms, Srivijaya's strength wasn't forever. Over the centuries, new rivals rose. Chola raiders from India attacked in the 11th century, hitting Srivijaya's ports like a surprise storm. Trade routes began to shift. Other powers, like the Majapahit Empire, started stealing the spotlight. Bit by bit, Srivijaya's influence ebbed away like a tide slipping back into the sea. Here's the thing. Srivijaya didn't crumble in one big disaster. It didn't get swallowed by a single enemy. Instead, they faded quietly. Ports grew quiet, monks moved on, and the great fleets were no longer feared. By the 14th century, the once great maritime empire was just another set of islands with stories buried under jungle and salt air. Imagine sailing through those waters centuries later. You'd see nothing but green shores and calm waves, never guessing that mighty Srivijaya once ruled there. A fisherman might pull up an old coin in his net and wonder where it came from. That's how forgotten kingdoms speak through little clues left behind. Srivijaya's legacy didn't vanish completely, though. Their influence shaped cultures and languages across Southeast Asia. Trade routes they guarded for centuries became the backbone of regional economies. Even today, Palembang remembers its golden age with quiet pride. But the empire itself? It slipped away so softly that for a long time, historians weren't even sure it existed. That's the beautiful, haunting part. For hundreds of years, the world forgot Srivijaya. No big epic poem sang of their heroes. No crumbling castle walls stood tall enough to demand attention. They were simply gone. It wasn't until the 20th century that scholars pieced together their story from Chinese records, inscriptions, and scattered hints. It's like finding a message in a bottle washed ashore after 1,000 years. Take a moment now. Close your eyes and hear the sea. Picture the moon reflecting on calm waters. Picture a Srivijayan ship, lanterns glowing on its deck, gliding silently toward a distant port. On board, sailors swap jokes, a monk whispers prayers, and the captain scans the horizon. None of them knows that one day, their empire will be a forgotten name on a historian's desk. History can be loud. Sure, but Shavizia shows us it can also be as soft as a wave brushing against a beach at night. Their story feels like a lullaby the ocean hums, reminding us that even mighty kingdoms can fade without a sound. Tonight, we leave the tropical seas behind and step onto the wide-open Eurasian steppe. The sky here feels enormous, like a cathedral made of clouds. The grass rolls on forever, waving like a green ocean. Somewhere out there about 1,300 years ago, a curious kingdom called the Khazar Khaganate thrived. The Khazars were horse people, traders, and clever diplomats. They lived in a place where east met west between the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic caliphates, and the wild lands of the steppes. Imagine a medieval version of a crossroads truck stop, but with more swords and fewer sandwiches. If someone wanted to move goods between Europe and Asia, chances are they had to deal with the Khazars. Now here's what makes them especially fascinating. At some point in the 8th or 9th century, many of the Khazar elite converted to Judaism. Yepu heard right. In a world dominated by Christian and Muslim empires, the Khazar leaders chose a third path. It was like the ultimate medieval plot twist. Historians still debate why. Maybe it was political, maybe spiritual, maybe a bit of both. But the move gave the Khazars a unique identity and allowed them to stay independent, while bigger empires glared at each other over the horizon. Picture a Khazar market town along the Volga River. Merchants from Baghdad spread out fine silks. A Byzantine trader shows off gold coins, and a Khazar horseman chews on dried meat while guarding the gates. The air smells like spices and wood smoke, and everywhere you hear laughter, haggling, and hoofbeats. The Khazars weren't just about trade, they were also a buffer. They kept the expanding powers of the caliphates from pushing too far north, and they held back raids from other steppe tribes. Think of them as the quiet referees of a chaotic medieval league. But like so many kingdoms on our journey, the Khazars didn't last. By the 10th century, their power began to fray. New players entered the scene, most notably the Rus, the ancestors of modern Russians and Ukrainians, and the rising power of the Pechenegs and other nomadic groups. The Khazars faced attacks, shifting alliances, and declining trade routes. Over time, their stronghold cities, like Atil, were raided or abandoned. What's striking is that their end wasn't some huge, famous battle. No great poem tells the tale of the Khazars' final stand. They just faded, their people scattered, blending into other cultures. Some may have joined neighboring tribes, others settled in far-off lands. Over generations, their name became a whisper on the steppe winds. Imagine a lonely Khazar rider one evening, watching the sunset over the grasslands. He hears fewer horns calling traders to market. The roads are quieter, the gold isn't flowing like it used to. Maybe he wonders if the world has moved on without his people, and maybe he's right. Centuries later, scholars would puzzle over the Khazars. Archaeologists sifted through ruins. Historians traced old letters and coins, or even wild theories. Some claimed distant connections between the Khazars and later Jewish communities in Europe, though evidence remains debated. The truth is, the Khazars remind us how easily even a major power can vanish when the world shifts around them. There is a gentle lesson in their story. Power can be as temporary as footprints in the steppe grass. The wind erases them quickly, and only the memory of movement remains. Take a moment now, close your eyes, and feel the wide horizon. Hear the steady hoofbeats of a Khazar patrol, the distant cry of a hawk overhead, the murmur of traders by a campfire. Somewhere beneath layers of time and soil, pieces of broken pottery and old coins still whisper the name Khazar. Their kingdom might be gone, but for a few centuries, they held the world's attention not by shouting, but by quietly managing the crossroads of continents. That's the kind of quiet strength that fits perfectly in a bedtime story. Tonight we travel to the heart of the Sahara, a place so dry and endless you'd swear nothing could live there. But thousands of years ago, the Garamantes built a kingdom here, right in the middle of the sand. Their story is one of quiet, genius turning barren desert into green farmland, only to fade back into the dunes almost without a trace. Imagine the Sahara not as a sea of lifeless sand, but as a land of secret valleys and rocky plateaus. The Garamantes lived in what is now southern Libya. To the casual traveler, their territory would have looked like a wasteland. But the Garamantes knew better. Beneath the hot surface, water flowed hidden aquifers deep underground. All they had to do was bring it up. And oh, did they. These desert engineers dug long underground tunnels called fagaras like ancient plumbing on a heroic scale. The tunnels carried water from the hills to their fields, where date palms and crops grew. Picture an oasis surrounded by high dunes, a tiny green miracle carved out of emptiness. Even medieval knights would have stopped their horses to stare and mutter, "Well, that's clever." The Garamontes weren't just farmers, they were traders and raiders too. They used fast chariots to zip across the sands, surprising their neighbors. Roman writers describe them as fierce and independent, giving Rome headaches on its southern frontier. The Garamontes even raided Roman lands at times, then vanished back into the desert like phantoms. But despite their daring raids, they weren't allowed empire. They didn't build massive stone fortresses or grand monuments. Their towns were modest, their records few. What they built was practical farms, irrigation, small settlements. To a sleepy storyteller like me, that makes them feel even more mysterious. Their decline began slowly. Over centuries, the Sahara grew drier. Water tables dropped. The foggers that once sang with life began to fail. Without water, fields withered and villages emptied. Trade routes shifted, leaving the Garamontes isolated. By the time Islamic travelers passed through in the Middle Ages, the once thriving kingdom was just a memory. No grand battle, no tragic last stand. Just quiet abandonment. Sand filled the tunnels, and the wind erased their tracks. Think about it. People lived, loved, and laughed in places we'd now call unlivable. Children once chased each other through Garamantian villages. Farmers checked their palm trees at dawn. Traders loaded camels and watched the sun rise over dunes. And then, over generations, it all slipped away. Centuries later, explorers and archaeologists began finding Clues-Rock art of chariots on cliff walls, fragments of pottery, ruins of their tunnels. Satellite images even revealed the traces of ancient fields under the desert. The Garamontes had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to remember. Close your eyes for a second and imagine a Garamantian night. The air is cool after a blistering day. A campfire crackles in a small courtyard. A farmer leans back against a mud brick wall, tired but proud of the miracle he's coaxed from the desert. In the distance, a chariot rolls in, wheels whispering over sand. The stars above are so bright, they almost hum. The Garamontes remind us that survival can be quiet brilliance, not loud conquest. They didn't need vast armies or towering castles. They needed knowledge of the land, patience, and a bit of daring. Their kingdom faded, but their ingenuity still impresses us today. It's easy to think of the Sahara as timeless and empty, but once it held cities and stories. That's the magic of forgotten kingdoms. They teach us the world is fuller than it seems. Even the harshest places have been home to dreams. Tonight, we wandered to the rugged lands of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. The hills here are steep and rocky, dotted with wildflowers and ruins. Long before these valleys heard the calls to prayer or the clash of crusaders, they belonged to the Hittites. By the late Bronze Age, the Hittites were mighty, kings who battled Egypt, forged iron weapons, and carved their names deep into history. But the story we're retelling tonight, Isinti about their glory, Dazades about their quiet, late period fade into memory. Picture an old Hittite scribe hunched over a clay tablet. His beard is grayer now, his style is slower. Once, his people's empire stretched wide from the Aegean to Syria. Now, their power has shrunk to small city-states, no Hittite kingdoms, scattered like pebbles after a flood. The great capital of Hattusa is abandoned, its once mighty walls crumbling under weeds and time. The Hittites were masters of treaties and diplomacy. Remember that famous peace treaty between the Hittite king and Egypt's pharaoh, Ramesses II? It was one of the earliest known, but treaties and clever politics couldn't stop the world from changing. Around 1200 BCE, the late Bronze Age world unraveled, trade collapsed. Cities burned, and mysterious sea peoples stormed across the Mediterranean. For the Hittites, it wasn't a single cataclysm, but a slow unraveling. Their cities broke into smaller principalities. Tarhuntassa, Carchemish, Meladames, now mostly forgotten, held on for a while. These Neo-Hittite kingdoms carried Hittite culture like tiny lanterns in the dark. They carved their gods into rock walls, wrote in hieroglyphic scripts, and traded when they could. but they weren't powerful enough to command empires. They became local players in a shifting political game, blending with Arameans, Phrygians, and Assyrians. Imagine a dusty, Hittite market square. A few traders sell grain and goats. Children play with clay figurines of storm gods. A traveling bard strums a simple tune on a lyre, singing songs of mighty kings who ruled long ago. The people still believe in their gods, still speak fragments of their language. But even they sense the world has moved on. By the 8th century BCE, the Neo-Hittite states were absorbed by the rising Assyrian Empire. No grand final battle made the front page of ancient history. No epic poem immortalized their last king. The Hittites just slipped beneath the waves of time, leaving behind ruins, tablets, and rock carvings for future explorers to puzzle over. Centuries later, their story was nearly forgotten. In the 19th century, European travelers stumbled on strange ruins in Anatolia, stone lions guarding gates, carvings of storm gods, inscriptions no one could read. Some thought they were relics of the Assyrians, or even the lost tribes of Israel. Only in the 20th century did scholars realize these were the Hittites, the once mighty kings of the late Bronze Age. Close your eyes for a moment and picture Hattusa under moonlight. The city is quiet now, its great gates broken, its temples empty. An owl swoops silently over the ruins. If you listen closely, maybe you can hear the faint echo of a priest chanting to the storm god Tarhan, or the clatter of a chariot rolling through streets that no longer exist.
Oh.
The Hittites remind us that power is fleeting. You can carve your name into stone, sign treaties with pharaohs, and command armies of chariots, but time will still wash it all away. Their quiet fade is almost comforting, in a strange way. Even the strongest kingdoms can become bedtime stories, whispered in a soft voice under a flickering candle. There's something humble about their end. They didn't leave the stage kicking and screaming. They passed the torch unwillingly. Maybe two new cultures who built on their knowledge of iron and law. Without the Hittites, history itself would look a little different. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think of those lonely hills in Turkey. Wildflowers grow where kings once plotted wars. Sheep graze where chariots once thundered. And somewhere in the earth beneath, clay tablets lie quietly, holding stories no one has read for 3,000 years. Our path leads to the highlands of East Africa. Rugged mountains kiss the sky, and rivers cut deep valleys through green plateaus. Here once stood the kingdom of Aksuma, realm of traders, builders, and quiet power that ruled the Red Sea's lifeblood for centuries. Its story is like the sound of a church bell far off in the hills, steady at first, then fading softly into memory. Picture Aksum, around the 4th or 5th century CE. Its capital city bustles with merchants and pilgrims. Tall stone stelae, some as high as a modern building, pierce the sky like spears of granite carved with delicate patterns. These weren't tombstones for kings only. They were Aksum's way of saying, we're here, we matter. Aksum controlled trade between Africa, Arabia, and India. Ivory from African elephants, gold from Nubia, frankincense from Yemenal, passed through Aksumite ports. If you were a Roman merchant buying spices in Egypt, or a sailor from India chasing monsoon winds, Aksum was on your map. Its harbors on the Red Sea, like Agilis, were busy crossroads of the ancient world. But Aksum wasn't just a trading empire. It was also among the first great kingdoms to embrace Christianity. Around the early 4th century, King Ezana converted, and Ezana became a beacon of the faith long before Europe fully turned Christian. Stone churches rose among the hills, their bells calling the faithful under African skies. Imagine a shepherd pausing mid-song as a bell echoes through the valley, knowing he's part of something bigger. Aksum's power seemed solid, but history had other plans. Over time, new Islamic states rose across the Red Sea. Trade routes shifted. The rich ports that fed Aksum's wealth slipped from its control. Climate changes may have hurt its farming too. The once thriving capital slowly emptied, its grand stelae standing, silent like guardians who'd lost their watch. Unlike kingdoms that end with a blaze of war, Aksum's decline was gentle. No army stormed its gates with fire. No epic last stand was sung by poets. Instead, the kingdom receded into the highlands, leaving behind stone churches, legends, and whispers. By the Middle Ages, travelers spoke of Aksum like a half-remembered dream, once great, now ghostly. Picture walking through Aksum today. The stelae still rise from the earth, worn but proud. Their carvings, weathered by 1,000 rains, still hold the echoes of a vanished court. You might see a local child play near a stone older than most civilizations. A church bell rings, just as it did 15 centuries ago. Somewhere a priest chants in Giez, the ancient language of Aksum, a tongue once spoken by kings. There's a kind of peace in Aksum's story. Its people didn't disappear completely. They became part of Ethiopia's rich heritage. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still traces its roots to Azana's conversion. The Stele, now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, continue to tell their quiet tale to anyone who pauses long enough to listen. Take a breath and imagine that Aksumite sunset. Orange light on granite, Stele, the hum of evening insects, the faint sound of a shepherd's flute echoing off the hills. Somewhere beyond the horizon, ships sail new trade routes, and the world moves on. But here, for a heartbeat, history holds still. Aksum reminds us that even mighty powers can slip into legend without fanfare. They don't have to vanish in violence to leave a mark. Sometimes they leave behind bells, churches, and stones that outlast empires. On night, we travel far back, so far that the world itself feels half-formed. The Bronze Age Near East was a bustling neighborhood. Egyptians in their golden crowns, Hittites with their iron chariots, Babylonians scribbling laws on clay. And there, in the middle of it all, stood a kingdom many people today barely know, Mitanni. The Mitanni kingdom rose around 1500 BCE, in the lands that are now northern Syria and southeastern Turkey. It was like a quiet but clever player in a high-stakes game. While Egypt and the Hittites wrestled for power, Mitanni slipped between them, balancing alliances, building strength, and carving out a place in history. Imagine a Mitanni court on a warm evening. Torches flicker against mud brick walls. Nobles gather under a painted ceiling, their garments dyed in rich colors. A harp hums as a servant pours wine into clay cups. The king, let's say, King Artadama, or maybe Shatarna, leans forward with a sly smile. He knows tomorrow brings negotiations with Egypt, and the day after might bring battle with the Hittites. The Mitanni weren't just diplomats, they were master horse trainers. Their chariot warfare was legendary. In fact, their techniques influenced both Hittite and Egyptian armies. Some of the oldest known horse training manuals written on clay tablets came from Mitanni wisdom. Picture a dusty training field outside a Mitanni city. Horses snort, their breath misting in the dawn air. A young warrior adjusts his bow, while an elder murmurs instructions, passing down secrets that will echo in battles far beyond their borders. Religion, too, set Mitanni apart. Though they were Hurrian speakers, their elite borrowed gods from Indo-Aryan traditions. Deities like Mitra, Varuna, and Indra, names later famous in Vedic culture, appear in Mitanni treaties. It's like catching a glimpse of two different worlds shaking hands in the Bronze Age twilight. But the Bronze Age wasn't a gentle era. The same forces that lifted Mitanni also threatened it. To the west, the Hittites were growing stronger, hungry for land. To the south, Egypt was watching, wary of any rival in the Levant. Mitanni tried to play the middle, marrying daughters to foreign kings, signing treaties, sending gifts, but balancing on a sword's edge can't last forever. By the 14th century BCE, the Hittite king Suppiluliuma struck hard. Hittite armies swept through Mitanni lands, capturing cities and breaking its power. Assyria, once a vassal of Mitanni, also rose to claim independence and then territory. The kingdom splintered. Some Mitanni nobles fled. Others served new masters. The name Mitanni faded from inscriptions, replaced by Hittite and Assyrian boasts. What's striking is how quietly Mitanni disappeared. There's no single famous last stand, no Thermopylae or Troy. Their memory dissolved into the empires around them. For centuries, scholars barely knew they existed. Only in the 20th century, as archaeologists dug through dusty ruins and pieced together cuneiform tablets. Did Mitanni step out of the shadows again? Imagine standing on a low hill in northern Syria today, wind tugging at your sleeves. Beneath your feet, somewhere in the earth, are the remains of Mitanni, palaces' collapsed walls, broken pots, a child's bead. The kings who once maneuvered between giants are now whispers on broken tablets in museum cases, yet their fingerprints linger. Those horse training manuals influenced warfare for centuries. The Indo-Aryan gods they honored hint at early cultural connections stretching from the Middle East to India. Mitanni might be forgotten by most, but its ripples touch cultures far beyond its fallen walls. There's a kind of comfort in their story. Not every kingdom needs to blaze brightly or die in epic tragedy to matter. Mitanni lived, thrived, and quietly slipped away, like a campfire that burned low under the stars. Take a breath. Hear the soft wind over ancient plains. Somewhere out there, a fragment of a Mitanni song might still be humming through the stones. A lullaby for a people who refused to shout their names but left their mark just the same. Next we wander east, where deserts stretch so wide they seem endless. Rivers like the Amu Darya carve lifelines through dry earth, and oasis towns glitter like tiny emeralds in the sand. This was once the heart of the Khwarezmian Empire, a realm that rose fast, shone bright, and vanished almost as quickly its fall swept away by one of history's fiercest storms. The Khwarezmian Empire was young compared to the ancient kingdoms we've visited. Around the 12th century CE, Khwarezm, centered in modern Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and parts of Iran, was a regional power under the Seljuks. But as the Seljuk hold weakened, Khwarezm seized its chance. By the late 1100s, it had grown bold, its rulers calling themselves Shahs of Khwarezm. They built cities with mosques and markets, commanded caravan routes, and controlled trade across Central Asia. Picture a Khwarezmian city on a market day. Merchants shout over stalls laden with silk, spices, and carved wood. Camels groan under loads of goods from Persia, India, and China. A scholar in a shaded corner debates philosophy, while a baker sells warm bread that smells of sesame and smoke. The empire felt alive, proud, wealthy, and confident. But confidence can sometimes be a trap. By the early 13th century, the Khwarezmian Shah, Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, ruled a vast territory stretching from the Persian Gulf to the steppes. He believed himself strong enough to face any rival. Then came a distant power few had yet seen, the Mongols. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a caravan to trade with Khwarezm, seeking peaceful relations. But the Shah, suspicious or, perhaps arrogant, had the caravan's members executed. It was a fatal mistake. Genghis Khan, not a man known for forgiveness, unleashed his armies in 1219. The Mongol invasion of Khwarezm was swift and merciless. Cities that had bustled with life were burned to ash. Markara, Samarkand, Urgench names, once sung in poetry, fell one after another. Genghis Khan reportedly told the people of Markara, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Whether the quote is exact or legend, its spirit captures the moment. Imagine the terror of those days. A Khwarezmian family fleeing across the desert under a smoky sky, clutching what little they can carry. Behind them, a city that yesterday smelled of bread and spice is now nothing but fire and silence. The Shah fled west, pursued relentlessly. He died on a lonely island in the Caspian Sea in 1220, a once great ruler reduced to a fugitive. His son tried to rally what forces remained, even raiding parts of Persia and the Levant, but the empire itself was gone. Less than 2 years, Khwarezm had been erased from the map. The Mongols didn't. Just destroy Khwarezm's cities. They disrupted the trade networks and knowledge that flowed through them. Libraries burned, irrigation systems collapsed. For centuries afterward, the region would bear scars of this invasion. The Khwarezmian legacy became a whisper, a memory held in ruins. Few coins, a scattering of chronicles written by their enemies. Yet their story still hums beneath the desert winds. The cities they built would be rebuilt by later empire Timurids, Safavids, Uzbeks. Their place on the Silk Road shaped the movement of goods and ideas across continents. And their tragic fall reminds us how even the most confident kingdoms can disappear overnight when history turns. Picture the Amu Darya at sunset now. Its waters glow gold under the fading light. Along its banks, farmers still till soil, unaware they walk over forgotten foundations. A shard of pottery here, a crumbling wall, they're little signs that Khwarezm once stood proud. There's something haunting but peaceful in their story. The Khwarezmians weren't the first to rise and fall, nor the last. Like so many kingdoms, they were a chapter in a much larger book. Now, our path bends toward the sparkling blue of the eastern Mediterranean. There, under the sun and salt air, lies the island of Cyprus, a jewel of the sea that once bore the crown of kings. The kingdom of Cyprus was never the largest or strongest power, but for a few shining centuries, it stood as a bridge between worlds east and west, crusader and Muslim, merchant and pirate. Picture the 12th century. The Crusades have shaken the Holy Land. Knights in mail ride under blazing banners. In 1191, during the Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart of England stormed Cyprus after a quarrel with its ruler, Isaac Comnenos. Richard sells the island to the Knights Templar, who quickly realize ruling a restless population isn't as easy as swinging swords. Soon after, the Templars sell it again, this time to Guy de Lusignan, a crusader king without a kingdom after losing Jerusalem. And so, the Lusignan dynasty begins its reign on Cyprus. Imagine strolling through medieval Nicosia. Narrow streets twist between stone churches and busy markets. Frankish knights clank by in armor, while Greek merchants haggle over olives and wine. A Venetian trader stops to admire silver jewelry, and a local Cypriot baker pulls flatbreads from a hot oven. The air smells of roasted lamb, sea salt, and adventure. Da-da-da. Under the Lusignans, Cyprus became a thriving kingdom. Sugar plantations sweetened European markets, while ports like Famagusta bustled with Genoese and Venetian ships. The island's position made it a perfect stop for merchants and crusaders heading east. But being a crossroads is dangerous. Too many eyes watch a bridge. By the 14th century, Cyprus was caught between empires. Mamluks from Egypt raided its shores. Pirates prowled the waters. Venetian bankers whispered in royal ears, and Genoese merchants schemed in smoky taverns. Kings tried to keep the peace, but the crown often wobbled. Even the famed city of Famagusta was seized by Genoa for nearly a century. One of Cyprus's most famous queens, Catherine Cornaro, came not from local nobility, but from Venice. In 1474, she married King James II of Cyprus, but soon tragedy struck. James died, and Catherine, barely more than a girl, became queen. Venice, ever watchful, slowly took control. By 1489, Catherine voluntarily handed Cyprus to the Venetian Republic. The Kingdom of Cyprus as an independent realm was no more, but even that wasn't the end. Venice held the island until the mighty Ottoman Empire arrived in 1571, sweeping aside Venetian forts after a bloody siege at Famagusta. Cyprus then became part of the Ottoman world for centuries, and the Lusignan kingdom slipped quietly into the pages of history. Walk the streets of Cyprus today, and the layers are still there. Gothic cathedrals turned into mosques. Venetian walls encircle old towns. Stone castles perch on mountain ridges, their halls open to the wind. The whispers of Lusignan knights and Venetian merchants cling to the ruins. There is a tender sort of beauty in the kingdom's fate. Cyprus didn't vanish in a single fiery moment. It simply changed hands, adapted, and kept moving like the sea that laps its shores. The Lusignans are gone, but the stories remain. Richard the Lionheart's swift conquest. Catherine Cornaro's bittersweet rule, the bustling ports where east met west. Take a moment to picture a Cypriot sunset, the sky burning orange over calm waters. Waves curling against rocky beaches, a ruined castle silhouetted on a hill. Maybe, if you listen carefully, you can hear the distant sound of a lute or the echo of a crusader's laugh. Tonight we leave the blue Mediterranean behind and journey deep into Eastern Europe. The air grows cooler, the forests denser, and the rivers wider. This is Belarus today, but long ago, it was the homeland of the Principality of Polotsk, one of the earliest and proudest states of the Eastern Slavs. Picture the 10th century. The Dvina River glistens in the morning light. Traders paddled long wooden boats loaded with furs, honey, and wax. Heading toward the Baltic Sea, on the riverbank Polotsk's wooden walls rise above the mist. Inside, smoke curls from chimneys, and the smell of fresh bread mingles with pine sap. Bells from a small wooden church call villagers to prayer. The Principality of Polotsk wasn't vast like Kiev and Rus or wealthy like Novgorod, but it was strong and independent, carving its own place in the medieval world. The city of Polotsk itself became a cultural and spiritual center. The principality's most famous ruler, Prince Vseslav, was said to have been born under a magical sign. Legends whispered that he could transform into a wolf and roam the forests at night. Whether true or not, the tale speaks to how the people saw their leaders. Part warrior, part wizard, part protector of the land. Polotsk often found itself between powerful neighbors. Kiev and Rus sought influence over its lands, while Scandinavian traders eyed its river routes. Sometimes Polotsk allied with these forces. Sometimes it fought fiercely to remain free. Under Prince Vseslav, the principality even challenged Kiev itself, briefly seizing the great city in 1068. For a moment, Polotsk stood as a rival to the greatest power of the Rus, but such independence is hard to maintain. Over time, Polotsk became a pawn in the shifting politics of the region. Internal divisions weakened it. Stronger powers grew around it: Lithuania to the west, the Mongols to the east. By the 13th century, Polotsk had lost much of its autonomy, eventually becoming part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Imagine wandering the forests near Polotsk today. The air smells of damp earth and pine needles. Somewhere under the mossy ground lie the remains of old fortifications and forgotten villages. The same river that once carried traders and warriors under Polotski's banner. A ruined church or an ancient cross might stand quietly among the trees, a marker of the principality's long-ago faith. The people of Polotsk left more than ruins. They left stories, hymns, and art. The St. Sophia Cathedral in Polotsk, built in the 11th century, still stands as a witness to that time. Its stone walls and domes hold centuries of prayers, wars, and rebirths. Step inside on a quiet afternoon, and you might feel the echoes of those who came before. Princes plotting their next move. Merchants thanking their gods for safe travels. Children marveling at the painted icons. It's also about the smaller states that held their ground, shaped their regions, and then quietly folded into something new. Their names may fade from textbooks, but their rivers, forests, and stories still breathe. The sky burns orange and violet, and the water reflects every shade. In the distance, an owl calls. Maybe, just maybe, Prince Vseslav's spirit Volf, or man pads, silently through the trees, still guarding the land he once ruled. Next up, we drift southward into the heart of the Arabian Peninsula. The land stretches out in waves of sand, broken by cliffs and dry wadis. At night, the sky here feels impossibly big, so full of stars you could almost scoop them up with your hands. Long ago, in these quiet valleys of northwestern Arabia, the kingdom of León flourished. It was a world of caravans, incense, and hidden canyons, a place that rose quietly and disappeared just as softly. The Leonites made their home around what is now Al-Ula in Saudi Arabia. Picture the scene: sandstone cliffs glowing orange in the morning sun, a line of camels swaying down a dusty path, their saddlebags heavy with goods. Traders stop at shaded wells, chatting in low voices. The air smells faintly of frankincense and goat leather. This was Lehén's world, a crossroads on the incense route that linked southern Arabia with the Levant and beyond. By the 5th century BCE, León had become a powerful kingdom in the region. They controlled key trade routes that brought spices, perfumes, and incense northward. Caravans passing through paid tribute, making León rich. Its rulers carved monumental tombs into sandstone cliffs, much like their Nabatean neighbors later would at Petra. The walls of Al-Qareba and Dedin held markets and temples where merchants bargained and priests prayed to their gods. Imagine a Leonite king, standing on a cliff at sunset. Below him, the caravan lights twinkle like fireflies. He listens to the wind whistling through canyons, aware that his kingdom sits at the center of a vast, unseen web of trade. He doesn't know his name will one day be forgotten, but tonight he feels eternal. The Leonites worshipped a variety of deities, and their inscriptions scratched into rock faces still survive. Some of these writings are simple prayers for safety or gratitude for a good journey. Others record the names of kings and gods. To modern archaeologists, they're whispers from a vanished world. But even powerful crossroads can't hold history's tide forever. By the late centuries BCE, the Leonite power waned. The Nabateans, rising in Petra to the north, gradually took over their trade routes. The great walls of Lehén's cities were left to the desert wind. Camels still passed by, but the toll collectors were gone. The kingdom didn't collapse with a bang. It just faded, swallowed by shifting sands and changing trade patterns. Today, the ruins of León lie quiet among Saudi Arabia's most stunning landscapes. Massive stone lions guard ancient tombs. Carved facades glow gold in the evening light. If you visit Al-Ula, you might see a child playing near a rock carved with an inscription older than Rome. The desert keeps these memories safe. It's preserving them better than any library. León's story feels gentle. It's not a tale of bloody conquest or fiery destruction. It's a reminder that even thriving kingdoms can vanish when the world around them changes. Caravans take new roads, neighbors grow stronger, and once busy towns slip into silence. Take a moment to imagine the Arabian night sky over León. It's clear, deep, and endless. The Milky Way spills across the horizon like a silver river. A lone traveler wraps himself in a cloak by the fire, a camel snoring softly nearby. In the distance, wind whistles through abandoned tombs carrying the voices of a forgotten people. Now we wander back to the Mediterranean, to the rolling hills and rugged coastlines of ancient Italy before Rome ruled the world, before Caesar and the Senate. Here, in this land of vineyards and rocky cliffs, a mysterious people known as the Etruscans built cities, temples, and legends. Their alliance of 12 city-states, called the Etruscan League, shaped Italy long before Rome claimed it all. Imagine an Etruscan city in the 6th century BCE. Stone walls encircled terracotta-roofed houses. Streets bustle with merchants selling bronze mirrors, finely worked jewelry, and painted pottery. Priests, dressed in colorful robes, read omens in the flight of birds. In a courtyard, musicians pluck lyres while dancers twirl, their garments flowing like ripples of water. The Etruscans were artists, builders, and dreamers, and for a while, they ruled central Italy with confidence. The League wasn't a unified empire. It was 12 independent cities-places like Veii, Tarquinia, and Cerveteri bound together by religion, culture, and occasional mutual defense. They shared festivals and rituals, meeting at a sacred grove called Faenum Vultumae to honor their gods. Yet, like many confederations, they could also bicker and compete. The Etruscans influenced their neighbors profoundly. They taught early Romans engineering skills, temple design, and even some religious practices. The Roman toga and certain gladiatorial games traced their roots back to Etruscan culture. Even Rome's kings, before the Republic, included Etruscan rulers. Tarquin the Proud, for example, was part of that heritage. But the Etruscans' world began to shift. To the north, Celtic tribes pressed into their lands. To the south, Greek colonies thrived along the Italian coast, competing for trade and influence. And in the middle, a small but ambitious city on the Tiberone was growing restless under Etruscan influence. Rome eventually cast off its Etruscan kings, and over the next few centuries began absorbing Etruscan cities one by one. Veii fell in 396 BCE after a long siege. Others followed, some conquered, others quietly integrated. The League could not unite strongly enough to resist Rome's rise. By the 1st century BCE, Etruscan culture had been almost completely merged into Roman life. The names of their cities remained, but the Etruscans themselves had faded as a distinct people. Walk through parts of Tuscany today. The name itself comes from Etruscan, and their echoes are everywhere. In Cerveteri and Tarquinia, enormous necropolises still hold their painted tombs, banquet scenes, musicians, dancers, and family gatherings frozen on stone walls. Their art wasn't about kings on thrones or gods hurling thunderbolts. It was about life, joy, and community. There's something touching about that. Even as they vanished, the Etruscans left behind a celebration of simple pleasures: food, music, family, and faith. Their painted banquets remind us that history isn't only about battles and borders, est about laughter around a shared table. Picture an Etruscan evening long ago, the hills glowing gold in the setting sun, a gentle breeze rustling vineyards. In a courtyard, a family shares roasted meat, bread dipped in olive oil, and a jug of red wine. Children chase each other under the stars. Someone plucks a lyre, and a soft song drifts into the night. They didn't know their culture would one day be swallowed by Rome. They only knew the joy of the moment. This time, we sail north, past the forests of Poland and the quiet beaches of Lithuania to a rugged corner of the Baltic Sea. Here, long before maps were neat and borders fixed, there lived a proud people called the Curonians. Among them were chieftains so respected that later generations would whisper about the Curonian kings, local rulers whose world has long since slipped beneath the mists of time. Picture the Curonian coast centuries ago. The wind is brisk, carrying the smell of salt and pine resin. Narrow wooden boats carved by hand bob in small harbors. Warriors in fur-rimmed cloaks, sharpened spears near bonfires, their faces lit by flickering flames. In wooden halls roofed with thatch, villagers gathered to share stories, trade furs, and plan raids against distant shores. The Curonians were famed sailors and raiders. Some even compared them to Vikings. These kings were not monarchs in golden crowns ruling vast empires. They were more like respected elders and war leaders, chosen for their courage and wisdom, when danger loomed perhaps. A rival tribe or an invading force, the people would look to these kings to lead. At other times, each village lived mostly on its own, herding cattle, fishing the cold Baltic, and tending small fields of barley and rye. The Curonians' reputation reached far beyond their forests and dunes. Chronicles from the 13th century mention their daring raids on Denmark and Sweden. They were fierce defenders of their homeland, known for resisting both Scandinavian kings and German crusading orders. The Livonian rhymed Chronicle 1 of the few surviving medieval sources described them as skilled sailors and good at sea battles. Imagine long, narrow ships skimming over gray waves, sails taut in the wind, their crews singing in deep voices to keep rhythm with the oars. But history's tide was not kind. The arrival of Christian crusaders in the Baltic changed everything. The Livonian Order and other crusading forces sought to convert or conquer the pagan Curonians. Battles flared along the coastlines and river valleys. Over time, the Curonian kings lost their independence, their lands absorbed by neighboring powers. Some were killed, others perhaps quietly submitted, blending into the new order. Yet the memory of their kings lingered. Even into the 19th century, locals in parts of Latvia and Lithuania would point to certain families and say they were descended from the old Curonian kings. In village festivals, songs sometimes recalled the bravery of these coastal rulers who once stood against foreign invaders. Today, if you walk along the Curonian spit, a narrow strip of sand between the Baltic Sea and a lagoon, you'll feel the same restless wind the Curonian kings once felt on their faces. Wooden fishing boats still rock in harbors. Pine forests whisper secrets in the breeze. Somewhere beneath those dunes, the echoes of forgotten kings remain. There's something poetic in their story. The Curonian kings never built marble palaces or massive fortresses. They didn't leave behind libraries or carved monuments. What survives is a feeling, a rugged independence, a salty wind, the sound of oars dipping into dark water. Their legacy is written not in stone, but in the way the Baltic's shifting sands hold memory. Picture a winter night long ago. A Curonian kinglets, call him Lembotsits, by a crackling fire inside a timber hall. Snowflakes drift against the shutters. His warriors drink mead and tell tales of raids across the sea. Lembots gazes into the flames, knowing that tomorrow he may face enemies stronger than his small band. Still, he smiles. Tonight there is warmth and song, and the comfort of his people gathered close. Tonight, we cross continents again, traveling south to the edge of the mighty Sahara. The stars overhead are dazzling, like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Beneath this endless sky, where golden dunes roll for miles, once stood a wealthy trading city, Autoghost. Few people today remember its name, but 1,000 years ago, it was a shining stop on the great caravan routes that tied West Africa to the Mediterranean world. Autoghost grew at a crossroads of trade. Picture a bustling marketplace beneath the blazing sun. Merchants in flowing robes haggle over gold dust, ivory, salt, and ostrich feathers. Camels groan under heavy loads, their padded feet sinking into sand. The air smells of dates, leather, and spice. The city's adobe walls shimmer with heat, while beyond them, the desert stretches like an ocean. By the 9th and 10th century CE, Autogos was under the influence of the Ghana Empire Kingdom, famed for its wealth and gold. But Autogos was more than a simple outpost. It was a jewel of the Trans-Saharan trade network. Goods from sub-Saharan Africa, gold, cola nuts, slaves passed through its markets on their way north. In return came salt, copper, textiles, and luxury goods from North Africa and beyond. Imagine the life of a merchant here. He wakes before dawn to the muezzin's call to prayer. He counts his coin and checks his camels, making sure their water skins are full. By midday, he's bartering for salt slabs, so precious they're called white gold. At night, sits under the stars with other traders, sharing stories about faraway lands, the gardens of Al-Andalus, the markets of Cairo, the bustling streets of Kairwang. The city's golden days, however, were fragile. The desert is a harsh keeper of secrets. Rival kingdoms and shifting trade routes can be merciless. By the 11th century, Autogos's fortunes began to falter. The Almoravids, a Berber dynasty from the north, swept across the Sahara with religious zeal and military power. They seized Autogos around 1054, changing its political and economic balance. Over time, other trade centers like Timbuktu and Walat arose in importance. The caravans no longer needed to stop at Autogos. Slowly, the city's streets emptied. Wind filled the courtyards where merchants once argued over prices. Sand swallowed the edges of walls. The last guards probably left without fanfare, just closing a gate that would never be opened again. By the time European explorers began mapping Africa centuries later, Autogos was little more than a rumor and name found in old Arabic texts, a whisper carried by desert winds. Today, archaeologists have identified its ruins in modern-day Mauritania. They've uncovered fragments of pottery, foundations of houses, and traces of ancient walls. Standing among the crumbled stones, you can almost hear the distant bell of a camel caravan, the rustle of silk robes, the clink of gold coins. The silence feels alive, as if the desert itself remembers. Autogos' story is a quiet one, yet powerful. It reminds us that even the grandest cities can vanish without a trace, if the lifelines that feed them water, trade, or travelers dry up. The Sahara does not forgive neglect. Picture the desert sky at night over Autogos. The moon casts a pale glow over dunes that look like frozen waves. Somewhere a lonely fox pads silently across the sand. The ruins rest in the starlight, timeless and unhurried. Beneath them lie memories of merchants, kings, and wanderers, who once believed their city would stand forever. Tonight, we journey high into the Himalayas, where jagged peaks slice the sky and valleys cradle small hidden worlds. Here in the remote Zanskar region of Ladakh part of today, northern India there, once stood a quiet mountain kingdom called Zangla. Its name means Copper Valley, and under the gaze of snow-covered summits. Zangla thrived for centuries in a silence broken only by the wind and the murmur of prayer wheels. Picture a small fortress perched on a rocky ridge, its mud brick walls glowing amber in the late afternoon sun. Below it, green fields cling stubbornly to the valley floor, watered by glacial streams. Yaks graze lazily, their bells tinkling. In the village, monks in maroon robes chant in low voices, while butter lamps flicker inside a dim, chilly monastery hall. Life here was simple but rich with meaning. Zangla was never a sprawling empire. It was a tiny Himalayan kingdom, ruled by local kings who balanced diplomacy, trade, and Buddhist tradition. For travelers on the ancient Silk Road's mountain branches, Zangla was a welcome step, a place to rest, exchange goods, and share stories while snow blocked the higher passes. Caravans brought salt, wool, turquoise, and sometimes strange trinkets from faraway lands. Imagine a caravan climbing toward Zangla in winter. The air is thin, and each breath feels precious. Ow. The mountains glow pink in the dawn light, their peaks wrapped in clouds like scarves. As the travelers approach the fortress, a watchman beats a drum to announce their arrival. Villagers gather, smiling, offering hot butter tea to warm, stiff fingers. Though small, Zangla had its share of intrigue. Old chronicles tell of rival kings, alliances sealed with marriages, and whispered betrayals in firelit halls. But here, power struggles were fought not with great armies but with careful words and quiet moves. A single snowstorm could close a mountain pass, cutting the kingdom off for weeks, so rulers learned patience and humility. Buddhism shaped daily life. The monastery at Zangla was a center of learning and prayer. Monks painted bright murals of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on plaster walls, their pigments made from crushed minerals. Prayer flags flapped in the high-altitude wind, carrying blessings down the valley. During festivals, villagers gathered in colorful robes to watch Kam dances, masked performances that blended history, spirituality, and a touch of humor. But the world outside the mountains was changing. Over the centuries, larger powers, Tibetan dynasties, Ladakhi kings, later the Dogra rulers and the British shifted the political map. By the 19th century, Zangla's independence had faded. Its royal line dwindled, its fortress crumbled, and the bustling caravans became fewer as modern roads and trade routes bypassed the old paths. Today, the ruins of Zangla's fort still stand against the sky, their weathered walls overlooking the quiet valley. Nearby, a small restored monastery keeps the memory alive. Travelers who trek here speak of a strange peace of feeling that time has slowed, or maybe stopped altogether. The flutter of prayer flags and the distant roar of a river are the only sounds for miles. There's something magical about the idea of a mountain kingdom that simply melted into the snow. Zangla didn't fall in fire or blood. It faded like mist when the morning sun hits a frosty meadow. Its stones remain, but its kings are gone, their names barely remembered even in the villages below. Close your eyes and picture a cold Himalayan night centuries ago. Inside the fortress, a king sits beside a carved wooden window, wrapped in furs. Outside, the wind howls, rattling the prayer flags. A monk offers him tea, the steam curling like a ghost. Beyond the mountains, empires are rising and falling, but here, all is still. For that moment, Zangla feels eternal. Next, we head west, winding through high alpine passes into a land of emerald valleys and jagged cliffs. Tyrol. Today it's part of Austria and northern Italy, but long ago, this mountain realm was its own proud county, a small but strategic kingdom of sorts. Wedged among Europe's towering peaks, picture the scene centuries ago. Narrow stone bridges arch over rushing streams, their waters clear as crystal. Wooden chalets cling to hillsides, smoke curling from their chimneys. In a castle perched on a crag, a count gazes out over his domain.
The snow.
On the distant summits glows rose-pink in the dawn. Bells from a tiny chapel chime softly in the valley below. The county of Tyrol began to take shape in the Middle Ages, around the 12th century. Local counts consolidated small alpine territories, uniting villages and fortresses under their banner. The mountains were their allies, and their challenges steep passes provided defense, but also connected Tyrol to great European trade routes. Merchants carrying salt, wine, and silk wound their way through these valleys. Every caravan meant new coins for Tyrol's coffers. Unlike vast empires, Tyrol was intimate. Its counts often knew the names of village elders and the rhythms of their land. Festivals lit up the valleys with music and dancing. Farmers herded cattle up summer pastures, their families celebrating with alpine folk songs that still echo in Tyrolean culture today. Strategically, Tyrol became vital to whoever wanted control of the Holy Roman Empire's north-south routes. The Habsburgs recognized this quickly. In 1363, Countess Marguerite of Tyrol, known as Marguerite Maltache, ceded the county to the Habsburg dynasty. It wasn't a bloody conquest but a political maneuver, wrapped in marriage alliances and clever negotiations. Overnight, Tyrol shifted from a semi-independent Alpine power to a jewel in the Habsburg crown. Still, for centuries, Tyrol retained a distinct identity. Mountain fortresses like Schloss Tyrol, which gave the county its name, remained symbols of local pride. Travelers crossing the Brenner Pass would look up at those walls and feel the weight of history. The county's autonomy allowed it to manage its own affairs even as larger empires squabbled around it. Imagine a winter evening in the 15th century. A storm rages outside, snowflakes whipping against stone walls. Inside a candlelit hall, villagers gather around a roaring fire. A wandering bard sings of heroes and lost loves, while the count shares spiced wine with his guests. Outside, the mountains guard them, silent and immense. But history never stands still. Over time, as Europe's map shifted, Tyrol's independence faded completely. The Napoleonic War swept through, and control of Tyrol flipped between Austria and Bavaria. By the 20th century, after World War I, Parts of Tyrol were annexed by Italy, splitting the historic region. What was once a cohesive alpine county became a borderland between nations. Today, if you hike Tyrol's trails or drive its winding passes, you'll see reminders of that vanished county everywhere. Castle ruins, old stone chapels, and legends told in cozy mountain inns. The name survives. Tyrol is still celebrated for its folk music, hearty food, and distinctive culture, but the county itself exists only in memory. There's something comforting in Tyrol's story. It didn't end in flames or catastrophe. It slowly wove itself into larger nations, leaving behind traditions that still warm winter nights. Its alpine villages, with their flower-filled balconies and painted shutters, are living echoes of the old county's spirit. Close your eyes now and picture a Tyrolean dawn. The peaks are brushed with sunlight, and somewhere far below, a church bell rings, its sound rolling like thunder through the valleys. The air is crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and snow. In that moment, the county of Tyrol feels alive again, just as it did centuries ago. Tonight, we journey to the very tip of Africa, where the Limpopo and Shosh rivers meet. This land is sun-soaked and alive, the kind of place where baobab trees stretch like ancient guardians and elephants once wandered freely between rivers. Long before European explorers set foot here, a powerful kingdom thrived on these hills. Mapungubwe. 1,000 years ago, around the 11th to 13th centuries, Mapungubwe was the beating heart of a sophisticated African society. It wasn't just a small village, it was a center of trade, politics, and culture. The people here mined and worked gold, carved ivory, and cultivated crops on fertile floodplains. Their kingdom was built on community, clever farming, and connections that stretched far beyond their hills. Picture Mapungubwe Hill at sunset. Its flat top glows amber as shadows lengthen across the savanna. At its summit, a king surveys his land. Below, farmers tend millet fields, herders guide cattle toward waterholes, and traders prepare goods for the next caravan. There's laughter from the village, the clink of pottery, and the distant trumpeting of an elephant. Mapungubwe, people were part of an early global network. Gold from these hills traveled north, eventually reaching the markets of the Middle East and even Asia. In return, beads, cloth, and ceramics from distant lands found their way to Mapungubwe's people. This was not an isolated society. It was plugged into the world long before the word globalization existed. At the top of Mapungubwe Hill, archaeologists have uncovered graves of royalty, including the famous golden rhino, a delicate sculpture of hammered gold. This little figure, small enough to fit in your hand, has become a symbol of African craftsmanship and complexity. It tells us these rulers valued beauty, symbolism, and power all at once. Life in Mapungubwe wasn't without its challenges. The climate could be harsh, with cycles of drought and flood testing the resilience of farmers. But the kingdom endured for centuries, adapting to the land and thriving in the space between rivers. Then, quietly, Mapungubwe faded. By the 13th century, its power waned, perhaps due to shifting trade routes, environmental changes, or the rise of new centers like Great Zimbabwe. The people moved on, leaving their hilltop royal court behind. Without armies crashing through gates or fires consuming the city, Mapungubwe's story slipped softly into the earth. For hundreds of years, the site was forgotten, its treasures hidden under layers of dust and grass. It wasn't until the 20th century that archaeologists began to unearth its secrets. The golden rhino and other artifacts revealed a truth too often overlooked. Advanced African kingdoms existed long before European colonial records began. Today, Mapungubwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors who climb the hill can feel the weight of history beneath their feet. The view from the summit is breathtaking, rivers winding like silver ribbons across a vast plain. Thorn trees dotting the horizon, and the sky blazing with endless sun. As the wind brushes your face, you might almost hear the echoes of drums and laughter drifting through the centuries. Something deeply moving about Mapungubwe's story. It's a reminder that greatness doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it's found in the quiet strength of communities, in the shimmer of a golden artifact, or in the memory of a king standing on a hilltop, watching elephants roam below. Close your eyes and picture a warm African night 1,000 years ago. The sky is enormous, the stars so bright they seem close enough to touch. Around a fire, villagers share food and stories. In the distance, the King's Hill rises dark against the horizon. The kingdom seems eternal, but the rivers will keep flowing long after its name fades from maps. We're heading east in this episode, diving into the lush forests and meandering rivers of medieval Eastern Europe. This is Belarus today, but 1,000 years ago, it was home to a proud Slavic state, the Principality of Polotsk. In the long shadows of pine trees and beneath endless northern skies, Polotsk once held power and influence before history quietly folded it into larger empires. Picture Polotsk in the 11th century. Wooden fortifications ring a bustling riverside town. The western Dvina River glitters in the morning light, dotted with flat-bottomed boats carrying furs, honey, wax, and grain. Traders call out prices in a dozen tongues: Scandinavian, Slavic, Baltic, because Polotsk sat at a crossroads of cultures and trade routes linking the Baltic to Kiev and beyond. Its rulers, the princes of Polotsk, were ambitious and often independent-minded. They were part of the Rurikid dynasty, the same family that ruled Kiev and Novgorod, but they liked to chart their own course. One of Polotski's most famous rulers was Vyacheslav the Seer, a prince wrapped in legend. Chroniclers say he could shapeshift into a wolf at night and run unseen through enemy lands. Whether or not you believe that, Vyacheslav certainly made his mark, challenging Kiev's power and expanding Polotsk's influence. The people of Polotsk were craftsmen and farmers, but also devout Christians. The majestic St. Sophia Cathedral, built in the 11th century, still stands today as a symbol of the principality's cultural wealth. Imagine stepping into its candlelit interior 1,000 years ago, the scent of beeswax and incense, the glow of icons painted in brilliant colors, the soft chant of hymns echoing against stone walls. Polotsk thrived thanks to its location on the river routes that connected the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Its merchants grew rich, trading with Vikings to the north and Byzantines to the south. For a time, Polotsk could even rival Kiev itself. But like many small states, its fortunes shifted with the tides of larger powers. In the 13th century, Polotsk's independence began to wane. The Mongol invasions devastated parts of Rus, altering the balance of power. Polotsk escaped direct destruction, but found itself squeezed between rising neighbors. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania expanded, and by the late 14th century, Polotsk had been absorbed into Lithuania's growing empire. Later it would pass to Poland-Lithuania, then the Russian Empire, and eventually become part of modern Belarus. There was no single dramatic fall, no burning walls, or final desperate siege. Instead, Polotsk was gradually folded into larger states, its princes fading into history, its name surviving mainly in chronicles and on maps. Today, if you stand by the western Dvina River in Polotsk, you can feel its history in the air. The St. Sophia Cathedral gleams white against the sky. The quiet streets echo with stories of merchants, warriors, and poets who once called this place home. The river still flows as it did 1,000 years ago, carrying whispers of forgotten kings. Close your eyes and picture a Polotsk evening long ago. The sun sets over the forested horizon, painting the sky pink and orange. Boats creak at their moorings, and somewhere, a wolf howls, reminding listeners of Vyacheslav, the seer's legend. A family gathers in a wooden house, sharing bread and honey, unaware that their principality's days as an independent power are numbered. To them, Polotsk feels eternal, its wooden walls strong and its river steady. Our last stop takes us to the rugged hills and sunlit valleys of medieval Spain. Long before the country we know today existed, there was the proud kingdom of perched in the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. It was once the heart of Christian resistance against Moorish rule and a cradle of Spanish identity. But like so many great realms, it eventually slipped quietly into history. Imagine, in the 10th century, its capital city, also called, is surrounded by stout stone walls. Cobblestone streets echo with the sounds of merchants, blacksmiths, and pilgrims. The scent of roasting lamb and fresh bread wafts from open doorways. Church bells chime, calling people to prayer under the high blue sky of Castilla. Why? Was born out of the chaos that followed the fall of the Roman Empire. When the Visigothic kingdom crumbled under the Umayyad conquest, Christian nobles fled north to the mountains. There, in the early 10th century, rose as the strongest of the Christian kingdoms. It wasn't just a military stronghold, it was a political and cultural center. Monarchs like King Alfonso V issued some of Europe's earliest written legal codes here. An S. Cortes of 1188 is considered one of the first parliamentary bodies in history. S. story is woven with the famous pilgrimage route, the Camino de Santiago, which drew travelers from across Europe to the Shrine of St. James. Pilgrims passed through, bringing news, art, and trade. Picture dusty travelers resting their sore feet outside cathedral, marveling at its towering Gothic spires and its stained glass windows glowing like jewels in the afternoon sun. The kingdom also played a key role in the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim Iberia from Muslim rule. Its knights rode into battle under banners of crosses and lions, forging alliances and rivalries with neighboring Christian states like Castile and Navarre. But power rarely stays in one place. By the 13th century, S. fortunes waned. It was united with the Kingdom of Castile under Ferdinand III in 1230. The union was peaceful, strategic marriage of crowns rather than a bloody conquest. Over time, a separate identity blurred. Castile became dominant, and S. name slowly faded from maps. Its castles weathered storms, its banners gathered dust, and its proud history settled into whispers. Today is a vibrant Spanish city, but the kingdom it once ruled is gone. You can still walk its ancient walls, explore its Romanesque churches, and hear echoes of its royal past in the plazas. If you listen closely, you might imagine the clatter of armored boots or the songs of pilgrims drifting on the wind. Picture a twilight scene 1,000 years ago. A shepherd leads his flock through a golden field as church bells toll in the distance. A knight rides home, his sword at his side, while in a stone hall a king considers alliances and borders by candlelight. None of them could guess that mighty and proud would one day be a chapter in a bedtime story. The kingdom of didn't fall with a bang it became part of something larger, and in that quiet merging, it left behind more than ruins. It left legal traditions, cultural treasures, and the idea that even small kingdoms can help shape a continent. And so, our journey through forgotten kingdoms that vanished quietly comes to an end. From Mapungubwe's golden rhino to sunlit hills, these places remind us that history isn't just kings and battles, it's the stories of people, their hopes, their laughter, and their dreams. Even when kingdoms fade, their echoes remain in rivers and ruins, and maybe even in our own restless hearts. Now close your eyes. Picture the map of the world, dotted with places that once mattered to someone, places where campfires once flickered under stars. The kingdoms are gone, but their quiet magic lingers. Let it carry you gently into sleep. And that, dear traveler, is the end of our journey through forgotten kingdoms that vanished quietly. From Africa's golden rhinos to Europe's lost cathedrals, we've wandered through places that once shaped the world, places where kings made promises, merchants traded stories, and families dreamed beneath the same stars we see tonight. These kingdoms are gone, but their whispers are still here, carried on rivers, etched into stones, and tucked quietly into the corners of our shared history. If tonight's journey stirred your curiosity or made you smile at the strange and gentle way history moves, tap subscribe and ring the bell. Here on this channel, we explore the forgotten corners of the past, always with a cozy fire, an easy tone, and stories that won't keep you awake with noise. Drop a comment below. Tell me which kingdom surprised you the most, or one you'd like us to visit next time. And if you know someone who could use a calming story before bed, share this video with them. Thank you for keeping me company tonight. Until our next adventure under the stars, rest well, dream big, and remember, even when kingdoms fade, their echoes can still guide us home.